this is Michel Leviathan Sorbet, and this is a new episode of Wojennik TV. Today a new review, a review of a card game which was very popular at the time it was published, and it is still popular today. It is considered as one of the best card games published during the recent years. What title is it? This is Ashes, Rise of the Phoenixborn, a game published in 2015 by Plaid Games. It was also published in Poland by the Polish company Cube's Factory of Ideas in 2016. As I mentioned earlier, this is quite a popular game in which we will be taking control of creatures called the Phoenixborn, which managed to overcome terrifying monsters controlling Earth, but after destroying those monsters, the Phoenixborns decided to fight each other, and we will try to overcome our foes. We will try to become the one and only Phoenixborn. The author of this game is Isaac Vega. The title is for 2 to 4 players. The time of play is somewhere from 30 to 120 minutes, depending on the decks that we use, depending on our skills and experience, and the mode of play. Today a presentation of the components of this title and a brief description of the mechanisms. At the end, my final thoughts and a final conclusion. So let's begin and let's check how works Ashes, Rise of the Phoenixborn. Here is Ashes, Rise of the Phoenixborn, prepared to play a 2-player game. At first, let's take a brief look at the components and at the elements that each player will be using during game. The first and most important element is, of course, your own Phoenixborn card. Each of you will incarnate one of those Phoenixborns, and we receive 6 of them in the base game. Each of them has a specific number of health points. Your global objective during the game will be to reduce the number of health points of your opponent's Phoenixborn to 0. If you do achieve this, you win the game. Each of the Phoenixborns also has 2 additional stats, which are the battlefield level, which indicates how many creatures he can possess at any one given time on the battlefield. The second one indicates the number of cards which can be placed in his spellbook at any given time. Finally, each Phoenixborn has also a special ability which is unique, which is different on each Phoenixborn card. As you can see, each Phoenixborn has a different number of creatures available or a different number of spells which he can possess at any time, a different number of health points, and a different number and a different type of capability. The second element which we will be using during a game will be a set of cards. First of all, a deck of cards numbering 30 cards each, and also a conjuration deck in which we'll have a certain amount of special creatures. Each character will also receive a help card and 2 or even more magic cards, which will indicate some special additional capabilities which will be triggered during your turn. The most important part is your deck, your playing deck. Now, this deck is composed of up to 30 cards. When playing the core game, you already receive predetermined decks which can be used just opening the box and taking the decks from what is inside. So we have six pre-constructed decks, 1 for each Phoenixborn. In those decks, you'll find different types of cards. You'll find action cards, which are played and instantly discarded. You'll find spells, which will be placed in your spell book and then which will be available to use during your future actions. You will also receive reaction spells, which can be played in response to what your opponent does. You can also find creature spells, ally spells, which will be placed directly onto the battlefield. Those allies have a certain number of parameters, which will be the attack parameter, indicating how much damage such an ally can inflict, a number of health points, which indicates how many damage such a character can sustain before being killed, and also a regeneration parameter indicating how much wounds such a character can heal at the turn's end. The third type of cards that you will be using are the conjuration cards. Now, those cards are not part of your standard deck, and they include additional ally cards which will be placed onto the battlefield using spells which you place onto your spellbook. Those conjuration cards, as you can see, also include allies which have a certain parameter governing attack, health points, and also regeneration. The difference is that those cards, when killed, go back to this conjuration deck, whereas allies being taken from your major deck are discarded, so permanently removed from the game, although some special abilities, some Phoenixborn have special capabilities which allow you to regain discarded cards. Now, all the fun in Ashes, Rise of the Phoenixborn is also constructing your own deck, because I have said that in the base game you get 6 pre-constructed decks. But when you know the game better, when you have played already some games, you can create your own deck, and you can choose from all the 200 cards that you receive in the core game. You just have to construct your deck in accordance to some rules. Firstly, your deck cannot be larger than 30 cards. You have to choose 30 cards. You cannot have more than three cards of any given type in your deck. So you can, for instance, include 3 hypnosis cards, but not more. Finally, you can use only neutral cards without any symbol on the bottom right, or cards of your chosen Phoenixborn. So if you play another Phoenixborn than Meoni Viper, you cannot include cards with her silhouette inside your deck. You can also use the draft mode, in which you will be constructing your deck, drafting cards circulating among all the players, which is also a great way to play the game, and it enables you to construct each time a different deck. Constructing your deck consists also of adding dice. When using pre-constructed decks, the rules say what type of dice you should include, but each time you will have 10 dice of probably 2 or 3 different colors. In the base game, we get 4 different colors of dice, and when using pre-constructed decks, you'll always receive 2 sets consisting of 5 types of dice. When you construct your own deck, you can freely choose the types and number of dice. So for instance, you can choose 3 blue dice, 3 pink one, and for instance 2 of each other color. Now, those dice will be very important during gameplay because they will allow you to activate some cards, to use some abilities. Now, after gathering all those elements, you are ready to play. At first, you always roll all your available dice. You place them in your ready pool, and during the first turn of the game, you count the number of those universal symbols on all of your dice. The player who got the biggest number of such symbols begins play and becomes first player. Now, on those dice, you have 3 types of symbols: the standard symbol, which is the weakest one, the basic symbol, which is the stronger one, and the most powerful symbol, the magic symbol, which will allow you to use every kind of symbol associated to this dice on the cards. Because when using cards, sometimes you'll have to use the most powerful symbol. Sometimes the weaker one will be sufficient. Sometimes the basic one will be sufficient. If you want to, for instance, use a dice, if you need a weaker symbol, a standard symbol, you can also use the strongest one. So this is the better symbol, which allows you to use the die in all of the three ways. As the strongest symbol, as the normal symbol, and as the weakest symbol. Whereas when you have only the weakest symbol on your die, you can use it only as the weakest one. So you should try to get the highest possible number of the best magical face on your dice. Now during your turn you will do several things. The first thing after rolling your dice will be potentially discarding some cards from your hand. You can freely choose a number of cards from your hand and discard them to your discard. After doing so, you draw a certain number of cards until you have 5 in your hand. After this phase, you pass to the main phase, which will be the action phase. And during the action phase, during the action turn, both players will play their consecutive turns and they will use their assets. During your turn, you can do several things. Firstly, you can do a main action and additionally an additional action. You can start by doing the additional action and then doing the main action. It's not compulsory that you start that by the main action. Main actions include paying a cost, which is indicated by the symbol of the main action, launching an attack against the opponent's Phoenixborn, or attacking a creature of an opponent. Now the first possibility, paying the cost indicated by the major action, is for instance used when placing cards in your spell book. You can choose one of those cards which you keep in your hand, which includes this symbol, and by using your main action, place it in your spell book. After doing so, the turn passes to your opponent, who takes his or her own main turn. Then the turn returns to you, and using your cards, using also your assets in your playing area, you can play a new turn. Now, having already placed a card, you can use this card during your turn in order to do your main action, because after placing such a card, what will interest us is the bottom part of such a card. Such a card in your spellbook will allow you to do some things. For instance, you can invoke a new creature from your conjuration deck. So using your main action, placing also a token, a used token on this card, using a certain number of dice of the corresponding symbol. So here we would have to spend those 2 dice and place them in the used area. We can place a serpent from our conjuration deck. So when doing such an action, we will grab our conjuration deck, we will find the serpent, and we will place it on the battlefield. This card will be used in order to attack our enemy or to defend against enemies' attacks. The enemy can also play a creature into his playing area, for instance a powerful rhino, as you can see. Now another main action, apart paying a cost which includes the main action symbol, is launching an attack. This attack can be launched directly onto the enemy's Phoenixborn or against an enemy's creature. If we decide to attack directly the Phoenixborn, our opponent has the option of blocking such an attack with one of his creatures or taking damage equal to the force of attack of the attacking creatures. If he decides to block, he can use one of his creatures in order to block the attacking unit. While doing so, he has 2 options. he can absorb the damage inflicted by the attacking creature, but without putting a used marker on it, or he can counterattack spending such a unit, but enabling it to inflict also a number of damage equal to its attack stat. So it is always a question of decision, because if, for instance, he just takes the damage, during his activation he'll be able to use this creature which is not used, because we cannot reuse a card which has this symbol, and we can launch our own attack, attacking, for instance, our Phoenixborn. If we decide to attack directly a creature, this creature cannot avoid combat, but it can be blocked by its Phoenixborn, who can place itself in front of this creature and take the damage instead of this creature. So this is also a way to defend creatures if we want to keep them alive. If a creature receives an amount of damage equal or superior from its health, it is placed into the discard. It is killed. If the creature killed is taken from a conjuration deck, it isn't placed in the discard pile, it returns to the conjuration deck, and it can be invoked once more during one of our future activations. When it comes to the secondary actions, we can pay a cost which is indicated by the symbol of an additional of a secondary action. We can also meditate. Now, this is a very useful secondary action which consists in discarding a certain number of cards from our hand, from our spellbook, or from the top of our deck in order to change the face of a corresponding number of dice. So if we desperately need a stronger symbol of one or more of our dice, we can discard cards and change the face of such a card so that it indicates the interesting symbol. This is a secondary action, so we can use it and then use a main action requiring us to discard a dice with the corresponding symbol. Finally, we can also, as a secondary action, activate one of our magic cards by spending a certain number of resources and making the action and doing the action indicated on the card. For instance, we can activate this magic card in order to inflict 1 damage to one of the creatures on the battlefield. Each player has the possibility to do one major action, one secondary action. After doing them, he passes the turn to his or her opponent. If both players pass in succession, the turn ends. But if one passes, the other plays, the turn returns to us. Even if we passed, we can still make an action. So the turn ends only when both players pass in success. After the turn ends, we pass to the last phase, which is the renewal phase, during which each regeneration capable creature regenerates a certain amount of damage. We also take off the used markers from each card that was used during a turn, and finally we also have the opportunity to transfer a certain number of unused dice to our used pool, because we can keep some dice, but we can also transfer them to the used pool in order to once more reroll them during the first phase of the next turn. We play in such a way until one of the Phoenixborns is reduced to 0 life points. If one of the Phoenixborns runs out of cards in his deck, because some Phoenixborn decks are constructed in such a way that they target the opponent's deck in order to deck them, the play continues. But each time that such a Phoenixborn has to draw cards during the draw cards phase, he loses 1 life point for every card that he is unable to draw. There are some other rules governing, for instance, taking cards from the discard or placing multiple types of the same card into our spell book, but I won't be explaining them right now because this is not a tutorial how to play Ashes. I wanted only to briefly explain how the game works, what are its basic mechanics. Now I'd like to invite you to my final thoughts. I'd like to tell you a few words about what I think about this game, what are my impressions after playing it several times, what I think are its strong but also a little bit weaker points. Ashes: Rise of the Phoenixborn is a game that I really wanted to try. I'm a huge fan of card games. I have played Magic the Gathering and other collectible card games for many years. I have also played dice games, and this game has both. So this game intrigued me because all games using both cards and at the same dice is something that I'm really keen on. I have also read a lot of positive reviews about this game, so I was very intrigued and I was eager to try it. Now, after having played it several times, I'm ready to give you my thoughts, and I'd like to tell you what I think about this title. First of all, I believe that a very strong point of this game, and a thing that can attract potential buyers, potential players, is its visual aspect. This is such a pretty game. The pictures on the cards are really terrific, and in my opinion, this is one of the prettiest card games that I have ever seen. People who see this game will want to play it because it is so pretty that it attracts additional potential players. So using those cards, playing this game is a real feast. This is something exceptional. But of course, games are not rated, are not ranked only by their visual aspect. They are ranked and rated especially based on their mechanics. So how Ashes ranks in this sector? I'd say that this game uses some interesting mechanics, and it is a game which is really something apart from previous card designs, because it is a game in which the author tried to mitigate the luck factor and include some mechanisms which tend to minimize the luck aspect. Many card games, many dice games tend to be luck prone. So if you have a bad initial card draw, you're screwed. If you have a bad die roll, you are screwed as well. Here in Ashes, there are several elements which try to minimize this risk. The first one is the fact that you get both aspects. So you have both cards and dice. And including those dice to this card game gives you a second layer of assets and at the same time a second layer of decision, because you'll be able, using those dice, to maximize your gains thanks to the cards that you put into play earlier or that you have currently in your hand. At the same time, if you had bad die rolls, it is still dice rolls, it is still possible to change their faces using the meditation action. So there is an additional element which will enable you to obtain a better position, a better variety of assets to be used during your turn, thanks to some additional actions. And I like it a lot because this is a way to really change the way that you can rate your hand or you can play your turn. In many games, you just draw a certain amount of cards and that's it. Maybe you can draw one or two more cards, but you are in general in a very narrow corridor through which you have to pass with your assets that you have at the beginning of your turn. Here in Ashes, it's very broad. You can enlarge this corridor by changing the face of some die. You can draw additional cards. You can reroll some dice. You can choose from a lot of different possible actions, because you can not only play a card, you can also use the cards that you have put into play in a previous turn. You can use the actions directly from your dice. So there are a lot of options. Additionally, when starting the game, you can freely choose your initial cards. This is another element that I really like, because once more I'll refer to Magic the Gathering. This was one of the things that bothered me the most, that frustrated me the most, when I drew my initial hand and I got 6 cards, from which 3 or 4 require 2 or more mana and 1 land. It was frustrating, and even with the mulligan rule I still had sometimes bad draws, and at the end of the game I had the feeling that I lost because I have drawn badly at the game start. Here you cannot blame luck, because you'll be choosing your own cards at the game start. Of course, you will draw additional cards and they will be randomized, but the initial assets that you have will be up to you. You can choose freely how to begin the game. This is also a thing that enables you to use different strategies, because even if you have a deck which is focused on, for instance, inflicting direct damage, you can still choose what cards to use and maybe take a different approach, maybe try to convince your opponent that your deck is based on something else, and then attack exploiting his weaknesses. So it's also part of the strategy. I like that this game has a ton of interaction. This is a very confrontational game, a game which works the best as a head-to-head game in which 2 players are opposed one to another. This is a game in which you will really try to stifle your opponent, you'll try to destroy his creatures, you'll try to destroy his deck. You have multiple ways to win, and this is a game which has such an intensive interaction that it is a very confrontational title. So this is not a game for casual play. This is a game for really playing some duels with your opponent. What I like is the fact that you get very different starting decks which you can play directly from the box, which work very differently because each of those decks is very different. Each of the characters works different. Each of the decks is based on something else. You have decks specialized in inflicting direct damage. You have decks specialized in attacking the opponent's deck. You have other decks which will try to bring to the playing area a lot of creatures and swarm, trying to overcome your opponent's defense, etc. I like this because this gives you a lot of variety. Additionally, you can use the draft system in which you further increase and enhance your playing experience, because here the game will reach another level. You'll not be creating your own deck, which is also absolutely possible by choosing freely from all the cards in the pool. You'll have to draw cards and you'll have to choose which of them suits your deck that you have created earlier the best. And I like this great variety of options that you can play Ashes. So what I think are a little bit weaker points of this title. The first one is somewhat contradictory to what I've said concerning the artwork and this visual aspect, because this game is gorgeous, it's very pretty, but it lacks some depth. It is a game which really wants to have a theme, but in my opinion it has none, because all this background story about being a Phoenixborn who managed to salvage humanity, to destroy chimeras, is written in the rule book, is somewhere on the back of the box. Maybe it's somewhere on the cards, but I just didn't feel it. This is somewhat abstract. This is somewhat next to the game. It has, in my opinion, it's not well connected to how the game works. You do not have the feeling of being a Phoenixborn. I didn't have any. you do not have this feeling of being a very powerful semi-god. Fighting your opponent, yes, but do you feel that he's a semi-god also? I absolutely didn't have this feeling. So there's something in the theme that I didn't get. Maybe it's a question of an additional immersion. Maybe it's a question of experiencing some additional background, reading some additional stories set in the same world. I don't know. I just didn't get it, and in my opinion, it was just flat. It was a flat experience in this sector. The second aspect is the fact that I have already said that this game is a very confrontational title. It is, in my opinion, suited for two-player games, but it is being sold as a game for 2 to 4 players. In my opinion, it works far better in a 2-player configuration than it works in 3 or 4 player games. So players who buy this game in order to play with their gaming groups might be disappointed trying to play this game in a group of 3 to 4 players. It is a game, in my opinion, which should be definitely played by 2 players. The last thing is that this game, as I said earlier, has a lot of variety when it comes to the starting decks, when it comes to the strategies, when it comes to your initial approach, when it comes to creating your own decks. But at the same time, this great variety and the fact that each and every card does something unique makes this game quite hard to approach, makes this game quite hard to start playing, because you receive those starting decks, the rules are very well written, it's not a big problem, but the first game will be quite difficult because you'll have to carefully read each and every card. You have to really wonder a lot what to do, how to use your cards, if to play a card from your hand, if to use your die, if to use one of the cards that you have put into play. There's really a lot of things to learn, and at the same time those decks might seem unbalanced because they work so differently that you might have the feeling that you lost because you had a weaker deck. It's a question of learning the cards, and this game really shines when you have played several games, when you have tried each and every character, when you start to learn the cards by heart, when you know what they do, when you know how they work together. This is the moment when this game enters a new level and it becomes even more interesting. But unfortunately, some players will not reach this level because they will play 1, 2, 3 games and they will stop playing, feeling that this game is luck prone, that this game requires a high knowledge of all the cards and they don't want to invest the time. So this is a really good game, but a game that should be played regularly, that should be played a lot in order to really enjoy it and in order to be good at it. Because to be frank, I'd say that an experienced player using each of the starting decks will almost always win against a rookie, because those luck elements which I said, which are present in this game but are strongly mitigated by some mechanics, will be reduced and the mechanics will promote experience. This is a good thing, but I think that from the rookie perspective will make this game difficult to approach. Concluding, Ashes, Rise of the Phoenixborn is an extremely interesting card game using also dice, so using a mix of cards and dice. A game which, in my opinion, doesn't have a good theme, which is not very felt, but a game with extremely interesting mechanics, a game which tries to give you tools to mitigate luck, to take control of all the assets that you have during your turn. A very confrontational game suited for 2-player games. If you have the possibility, definitely try it, because it is also a very pretty game, so playing this game will be a real pleasure. This was a review of Ashes, Rise of the Phoenixborn, published by Plaid Hot Games, and in Poland by Cube's Factory of Ideas. Thank you a lot for watching this video. I invite you to take a look at our Facebook and Instagram accounts. Have a terrific day and see you next time.